Welcome to the Art of Medicine, the program that explores the arts, business, and clinical aspects of the practice of medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Wilner. Today, I'd like to welcome Rachel Zemach. Rachel is the author of the recently published memoir, The Butterfly Cage. The subtitle caught my interest: Joy, Heartache, and Corruption Teaching While Deaf in a California Public School. But before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor, locumstory.com. Maybe you're curious about locums and how it might fit into your career story. But do you know all the different reasons physicians choose locums and how it works for them? At locumstory.com, you can hear firsthand stories as diverse as physicians themselves. There's not one solution for everyone. The variety of opportunities may surprise you. Locum Story is an unbiased educational resource. It has tools that let you explore trends in your specialty and compare different locums agencies. There's even a simple quiz to see if locums is right for you. Do your own research at locumstory.com. And now to my guest. Welcome, Rachel Zemach.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, Rachel, well, thanks for joining me. Before we get into your book, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became acquainted and immersed in the deaf community.
I was born hearing, and I became deaf when I was 10 years old, rather suddenly. Um, I was tested at school in a school-wide hearing test, and they found that I was deaf in one ear. And 2 weeks later, I had an accident that knocked out all my hearing in the other ear. So it was very sudden deafness. And because I was 10 years old, I had already learned to talk, of course, and began wearing a hearing aid and maintained my speech, even though I'm very deaf physically. And from there, when I was 14, I went to a school for the deaf for just 1 year. But there I learned ASL, and that's American Sign Language, and became very enamored of the community and the culture. So even though I led a lot of my life after that in the hearing world, I never lost my affection and interest in the deaf world. And years later, I got a job teaching at a school, at a regular public school, but teaching a deaf class. And there I really went through a transformation of my own identity. Um, and that's what I wrote the book about.
Okay, so were these children that were deaf the ones you were teaching?
Yes, deaf and hard of hearing.
Well, I guess I'll ask the obvious question. You know, you're up in front of the class. How do you communicate?
Sign language. Sign
So,
language. ASL, American Sign Language, um, it's a very powerful language. It is very comprehensive. And if anything, if you do a real analysis of it, you'll see that you're able to transmit more information on a topic through signing than through speaking. A lot more.
that's very interesting because I don't know much about sign language, and I've always assumed that it was sort of abbreviated. You know, that it would be easier to articulate in words, than with fingers and gestures. But maybe the opposite is true.
The the exact opposite. I don't blame you for thinking that because I know nothing about blind people and their ways of communicating. I know nothing about Braille and other forms of tactile communication. So I'm not surprised that hearing people know nothing about sign language very often. But the truth is that there are different kinds of sign languages throughout the world. Every country has their own sign language. And within this country, ASL, American Sign Language, is, in my experience, an incredibly important tool. Let me take the word tool back. An incredibly important vehicle for accessing the brain directly, the brain of a deaf child. My brain as well. When I'm around deaf people, there's a level of communication that I don't have around hearing people. When I'm around hearing people, there's stress, there's work, there's nervousness about lip reading them, about captions, which I'm using right now, captions, and which often make mistakes.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. There's a level of stress where that I don't have when I'm around deaf people. And likewise, deaf children, when they're getting educated from a teacher who is themselves deaf and fluent in ASL, the message that the teacher is giving goes directly to the child. It's not indirect like it would be through an interpreter being filtered through a whole other human being's brain and language. But it's not lip reading and stress and anxiety of trying to catch information in a mode that is not designed for you the way it would be among hearing people, but rather it's a simple straight line from one mind to another. And it's incredible how effective it is.
Well, I can see that. I mean, it's not a perfect parallel, but people who speak multiple languages are always more comfortable speaking the language that they were born into. Whereas the second language or the third language, it's learned. So they have to think about it, they have to translate back. But, when you see people who are fluent in many languages and then they meet someone else from their own country or their own location and they speak in their own native language, you could see that any tension evaporates, that it's much easier for them to communicate. I think for a deaf person to learn to speak has to be much harder, you know, than if they learn sign language. And I wonder also, there are cultures that going to wave around you a little bit here, that speak with their hands. And of course, if you're a dramatist or you're an actor, you use your body to communicate, to facilitate, to enhance your words. And sign language is physical, right? You're moving your hands, your body. Isn't that correct?
Sign language is very physical. The the face is part of the language. Tiny morphemes that are made by the mouth and by the eyes, the eyebrows, the positioning of one's shoulders, those are all part of the language, an official part of the language. In other words, students who are in sign language classes, ASL classes, will be taught when to raise their eyebrows, when to lower them, when to turn their shoulders. When they're describing a dialogue, they turn their shoulders for each person who is speaking at a time. there's a lot of physicality, but there's also a lot of nuance. And I'll give you one example of the nuance and how layered, multi layered ASL is as compared to English. So in English, we have words that have multiple meanings,
Yes.
and they're very important for children to understand. But hearing children pick them up automatically. They just hear the different meanings of the word. For example, get. I'm getting sick, or what time I'm getting home, or I will get some milk at the store. They're all different meanings of the same word get. In For deaf children, they don't hear this kind of casual use of the word get being different depending on the context. So if they're going to be reading English, they need to be taught very explicitly that the word get has three different meanings.
Hmm.
And the method that I use to teach reading to deaf children found that the word make, M-A-K-E, make, has 11 different meanings. You can make money, you can make a cake, you can make yourself sick by eating too much of the cake. You can make a friend. They're all different kinds of make. And each version has a different sign, a
Ah,
totally different sign. The signs have nothing in common with the word make. The signs are dependent on the meaning of the word.
more contextual. Okay.
Right.
Well, now, how hard would it be? I'm not particularly gifted in foreign languages. I stumbled through a couple of them. If I decided tomorrow that I wanted to learn sign language, because it sounds like it could be fun and it could be useful, how hard would it be? Could I learn in a week, a month, a year, your average person?
Okay, that's a great question. You know, it depends. Children learn really, really fast. Babies, before they can talk, can learn sign language. That gives you an idea of how fast, and it also gives you an idea of sign language being located in a different part of the brain than
Mm,
spoken English. So babies, hearing babies, they can't use their vocal cords until a certain age. But before that age, they can use sign language. So baby sign language is something that's very popular because it's enabling hearing children to communicate meaningfully in language, real language, not just by crying or gesturing or demanding something, but with real language before they're able to speak. Elementary school children, especially before the age of 5, can learn language incredibly easily. And as they get older, it gets harder. It does get harder for us to master a new language with age. But what really matters is your motivation. Are you doing it just because it seems fun and easy? Are you doing it because you are interested in dating a deaf person and they refuse to date you unless you're fluent in an ASL? That might give you a very good motivation. Are you learning because your boss at work is deaf and the only way you can communicate with her or him is ASL? You know, what's the motivation?
I can imagine parents who have a child who's born deaf. All of a sudden, they need to learn ASL so they can teach their child and they can all communicate. Does that happen?
Okay, so I'm really glad you brought that up because, first of all, it's not their fault. However, approximately 85% of our parents of deaf children, do not learn sign language,
Hmm.
or they pick up a few signs and they make up the rest. It's called homemade sign language. And it works when the child is little. When the kid is little, the parent thinks that by gesturing, they're communicating and it's good enough. And it's nobody's fault. However, I'd correct myself there. Where I would put the blame for this is on the specialist who the parents encounter. In other words, now newborn babies are tested for hearing. Their hearing is tested in the hospital at birth, sometimes 2 months later. But very, very small babies nationwide are tested to see if they have any hearing issues. Many of them do, and they're discovered early and they're sent immediately to an audiologist. The audiologist or the doctor, the pediatrician, the even the educational staff will present the hearing issues as a negative, a tragedy. I'm so sorry your child is deaf. The parents are in shock and they feel that their child is not what they expected. And life with their child will not be how they imagined it. And to reassure them, the medical professional immediately tell them, don't worry, there's a miracle cure. It's called cochlear implant. We can give your child a cochlear implant and they will be as good as normal, quote unquote, normal. They'll be able to hear. You can put them in a regular school. They'll be able to lip read. You can give them speech therapy. They'll learn to talk. They can live a normal life. They can go to a regular school. I have a neighbor who did it. He's deaf and he's going to a regular school and he's doing great. So this is the image that innocent parents are given. And of course, it sounds very attractive. It sounds like, oh, thank goodness. My child won't be limited to a small, deaf life. However, what the doctors are not saying is that it only works for some people. Most deaf people do not learn to talk. Many who do learn to talk choose not to. Many who get implanted with cochlear implants, 47% to be exact, of deaf people in this country who were implanted choose not to wear the implant. So there's a whole other side to the truth. And education in regular schools often fails. I mean, very often, 65, 75% of the time fails. And so you have a generation of deaf and hard of hearing children who were bursting with potential when they were little. And when they're in their early 20s, they no longer have that potential for thinking, for language abilities, for employment, or for education. And it wasn't their deafness that limited them. It was the educational and even the medical system. And that's why I wrote my book.
Ah, thank you. Because I think you would agree that if this technology worked 100%, then it would still be nice to communicate with other people with sign language. But the problem with sign language is the other person has to know it. And if you're in the playground, all the other kids don't know sign language. So if your implant worked 100% and you learned language perfectly and you were just like every other kid, maybe it wouldn't be a problem. But if the technology doesn't really work, the way it's built, then you're kind of neither here nor there. You haven't learned sign language, so it's hard for you to integrate into the deaf community, and you haven't learned to speak well because you can't really hear properly, and now you're kind of stuck. Is that kind of a summary of what you're saying?
That's an excellent summary. That's actually an excellent summary of the situation of the majority of deaf and hard of hearing children in this country. They're stuck in the middle. And they're stuck in the middle because of this misconception of cochlear implants, speech therapy, mainstream education in regular public schools, regular hearing classes, and hearing aid amplification being a cure all. Whereas the reality is, lip reading is extraordinarily difficult. All machines are flawed and faulty. You could have a battery that fails, and all of a sudden, you can't take your spelling test because your hearing aid battery suddenly went down on you. It's a machine, it's not real language, and it doesn't get received by the brain the same way actual direct language does. It's flawed, it's full of holes. And, but because of this mindset of the average hearing person, which is that speaking and hearing more and looking normal is better, deaf children are steered in that direction and not taught sign language.
It doesn't sound to me like it would be a big burden to add sign language to the other program. In other words, well, let's see if we can learn to talk and hear with all the gadgets we've got. But in the meantime, let's learn sign language too. Why not? Because as you say, when young children up to age of 5, they're sponges, right? They learn, and if you teach them, they learn, and maybe their parents ought to be encouraged also. Do you think, is there a stigma to being deaf? Is that one of the reasons why sign language is not pushed? Because then obviously you're deaf. If I'm talking with my hands here in the corner with my buddy, everybody knows I'm deaf. Is that a bad thing? Do you think that still exists, that there's a stigma to being deaf?
You know, it's funny, the time in history that we're living in right now is a strange one because it's almost schizophrenic in terms of its approach towards deafness. For example, think about the movie Coda. There's a movie, CODA, Coda, and it won Best Picture at the Oscar Awards last year. And the cast of Coda is almost all deaf and culturally deaf. And the theme of the movie is very deaf. It's a fantastic movie. I strongly recommend it. And it it won not only an Oscar, but it won very, very broadly throughout the whole award season. It was winning one award after another, after another, after another last year. And Marley Matlin was in it, Troy Kutzer, Daniel Durant. They're fantastic. And they're proudly deaf. And so last year, the Academy Awards saw the best and most famous actors and actresses in the world, or in this country, standing up and signing and hand waving in ASL their, and also signing thank you and I love you and nice to meet you. You know, they were learning a little bit of sign language. They were excited for Coda to have won. And all of a sudden, the whole hearing world was excited about deaf people and deaf culture and ASL. And when I went out in the world, right after the Oscar Awards last year, strangers everywhere were signing to me. Oh, you're really deaf. Oh, thank you. Nice to meet you. Hi, my name is. Everywhere I went, there was a positive attitude when they found out I was deaf. They associated it all of a sudden with glamour and Hollywood. So, and hearing people are learning ASL at a rate of 700% more over the last 10 years than they used to. They are thronging to ASL classes in high school and in colleges. It is the third most popular language and most used language in the country. And in colleges, I've heard they choose ASL over Spanish, Italian, French, etc. Admittedly, they do it because they think it's easier, which it isn't really. It's a language and it takes work. But there's this strange schizophrenia in how hearing people see deafness. On the one hand, they glamorize it and they love ASL and they want to learn ASL. Everywhere I go, hearing people tell me, oh, I've always wanted to learn it. I learned a little bit when I was in elementary school. I've never forgotten it. They're excited about it. They love it. They feel something for it. On the other hand, when you actually have a deaf child or a deaf adult like me who comes into a situation and says, okay, look, I'm deaf, I need a sign language interpreter. Or I might say, I'm deaf. I'm not ashamed of it. I just want to let you all know I'm deaf. There are many situations like this where people are surprised. Wait a minute, why does she sound proud of being deaf? Or if it's a child, wait a minute, we want that child to not call themselves deaf. We want them to call themselves hard of hearing. We don't, or we want them to hide that part of themselves. And they don't see the benefit to being culturally proud or ASL fluent or connected to the larger deaf world. They see the negative. So there are these two things going on simultaneously in our country.
Rachel, this is fascinating. And we're just about out of time. So I want you to tell us where we can find your book, which I presume goes deeper into these issues. Is that correct?
It does. It goes much deeper into these exact issues. And it does so by telling stories. So it's entertaining and it's also true. Um,
And it's on Amazon, right?
it's on Amazon, yes. And the publisher is called The Paper Angel or Unruly Voices. That's the imprint. And it's called The Butterfly Cage. And it just came out about a week ago.
Well,
So it's very fresh.
congratulations. Congratulations. And I'm going to put a link to it in on my website, andrewwilner.com. I have a library section, and I'm going to add the butterfly cage to that section. Of course, you can go directly to Amazon too. Well, I'd like to thank my guest, Rachel Zemach, for a great discussion. I learned a lot. I think this is a whole sort of a whole area of inclusivity that we're all working on, and a lot to learn about deafness. Rachel, thanks for being on The Art of Medicine.
Thank you so much. It's my honor.
Before we close, I'd like to give another thanks to our sponsor, locumstory.com, a resource where providers can get real, unbiased answers about locum tenens. I'm Dr. Andrew Wilner. See you next time.
This program is hosted, edited, and produced by Andrew Wilner, MD, FACP, FAAN. Guests receive no financial compensation for their appearance on The Art of Medicine. Andrew Wilner, MD, is Associate Professor of Neurology at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, Memphis, Tennessee. Views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this program belong solely to Dr. Wilner and his guests and not necessarily to their employers, organizations, or other group or individual. While this program intends to be informative, it is meant for entertainment purposes only. The Art of Medicine does not offer professional financial, legal, or medical advice. Dr. Wilner and his guests assume no responsibility or liability for any damages, financial or otherwise, that arise in connection with consuming this program's content. Thanks for watching. For more episodes of The Art of Medicine, please subscribe. www.andrewwilner.com